What is going on, Panthers Nation? Carolina Dad here, your host of the Two Growls One Roar podcast. Today, we are back with our 90-man roster breakdown. Part one. No, we'll have a part two, possibly a part three. Just honestly depends on how many we can get through in one session. So I did this last year in 3 episodes. We went through 30, 30, 30 on the roster to get you prepared heading into training camp. Training camp right around the corner. All the details of training camp have been released. You can go out and watch my video, get more details around that, and get you prepared if you plan to make the visit to Charlotte, North Carolina. But today we are here to talk about the roster and get you prepared for the season. With that said, we're going to start and go through the quarterbacks and the offensive side of the ball. So let's jump right in. I'm going to be using ESPN.com to go through the roster. A little bit easier for me. I can navigate to college stats for some of the rookies. Everything's in one place. I know Panthers.com also has content, but I thought, hey, we're going to use this. So here we go. Andy Dalton. So I'm going to start with, we're going to do it alphabetically. How it's presented on the roster. Entering his 14th season in the NFL. We know he spent most of his career with the Cincinnati Bengals. I'm going to have to get my man Randy Slack on here at some point. Talk Cincinnati Bengals because we know the game against the Carolina Panthers this year at Bank of America Stadium. So spent the majority of his career with Cincinnati, then bounced around. You remember backing up a lot of quarterbacks along the way in Dallas, Chicago, New Orleans. Last year, Carolina, and then back again for another year, the second year of his contract. At this point, you may wonder how many more years does Andy Dalton have in the NFL? I feel like he is going to be year to year from here on out. Does he maybe want to go into coaching, go into broadcasting? It seems to be the path for a lot of quarterbacks these days, becoming a TV personality. But let's talk about the football side of things. The football side of things, last year, 361 total yards, 2 touchdowns, 48.4 QBR rating of 88.4. He did appear in 3 games. Really, the Seattle game was the primary game where he was a passer. He started for Bryce Young when he was hurt, threw for over 300 yards. It was the most passing yards by a Carolina Panther quarterback last season. And some folks would probably say, man, I really wish we got Andy Dalton, or I wish Andy Dalton was the starter from the beginning. We can't harp on it. It is what it is. Time has passed. Sure, it probably might have been beneficial at some point, but considering everything that we saw last year, I don't know how much things would have changed with Andy Dalton and if he would have saved anyone's career at this point. Very solid quarterback. He knows his role. He knows he is here to be the backup for Bryce Young, the mature veteran in that locker room to help Bryce take the next step. And that's it. That's what he's here for. He's not here to compete for the starting job or put pressure on Bryce, just helping Bryce get better. That's all we got for Andy Dalton. Keeping it moving now with our man, Jack Plummer. If you are a member of the YouTube channel, this video is already out there, not this one I'm recording, but a video of Jack Plummer. He was one of the few videos that I recorded that actually went the way it was supposed to go. But here we are. Now that we're doing it all in one session, I'll keep it moving. Big quarterback, 6'5", 215. Last season played at Louisville, played 3 seasons at Purdue, 1 at Cal, and then again transferred to Louisville this past season. Saw a lot of success at Louisville. Was his best season in college. It's a weird journey to go from Big Ten to Pac-12 to ACC, but I think it's just the nature of college football right now. Not that we're here to talk about college football, but 300 yards, 8.1 average, 21 touchdowns. We know they fell apart at the end of the year, losing to Kentucky, losing in the ACC championship to Florida State. But Jack Plummer is the third quarterback on the roster. We know that Dave Canales likes to have a third quarterback in the system. We thought originally it was going to be a veteran. I don't know that I would rule that out, but as we move into camp, it's clear that it's Jack Plummer, third string, Andy Dalton, second string. I don't think Jack's going to compete for the backup role right now. Bryce Young, QB1. The only other thing that we will monitor is the potential for a fourth quarterback arm to come in. Really good thing to have in camp, in preseason. Again, just having someone back there. There's a lot of throws that Man, when you go out and watch some of the training camp, and then we only get to see a small portion of the practices that happen. Those quarterbacks stay busy. They are nonstop throwing the ball, doing all kinds of drills, and getting the ball out to the wide receivers. And for backup quarterbacks, third and fourth string, giving the defense a look when they're not going 11 on 11 or 7 on 7 with the ones. So there you go. That is Jack Plummer. Next on the list, we have Jack Plummer, who is considered now the third-string quarterback, 6'5", 215, out of Louisville, rookie, undrafted free agent. Spent 3 seasons with Purdue, 1 at Cal, and 1 at Louisville. This past season with Louisville was his most successful season in college football. Louisville ended up falling apart at the end. Still a fantastic season. Lost to Kentucky and then lost in the ACC championship game. But Jack threw for 3,200 yards, 8.1 average, 21 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. Was sacked 32 times, but 144.4. Passer rating. Jack Plummer is your third-string quarterback. I don't think he's going to be competing with Andy Dalton for the back role just yet. I know that Dave Canales likes to carry 3 quarterbacks. And I wouldn't be surprised if a 4th quarterback snuck around to, on the roster at some point, just for the preseason and training camp. It's nice to have extra arms, extra bodies. It's just going to be determining, hey, do we want to go with a veteran? There's a few veteran names still on the market, and I don't know that you want to bring another veteran in when you have Andy Dalton, but I think we'll see how Jack does. He's here. He's learning the system. He got to go to rookie minicamp. Now he'll continue to progress and, serve as the third-string quarterback. Is he going to make the 53-man roster? Hard to tell. I think we'd keep 2, and then maybe he's the practice squad quarterback, the third quarterback that you can call up for game days with the way the rules have changed. That is Jack Plummer. Next up on our list, and I could probably spend an entire video talking about Bryce Young, and maybe I will as the season gets closer. But for today's sake, we are doing a 90-man roster preview, and I'm trying to get through every single player in a reasonable amount of time. I'm still going to talk about Bryce and try to keep it as short as possible. Bryce Young coming off 2,800 yards, a little over 2,800 yards passing, 11 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, 33.4 QBR, which is 29th in the league, 73.7 passer rating. We can talk all about the struggles from last year with him personally and his development, footwork, mechanics, bad habits that were formed. We can talk about the things that were happening behind him within the organization, within the front office, within the coaching staff, just top down, everything that was reported. And that's not even talking about the pressure that he was getting, the lack of weapons, the receivers that couldn't get open. It's a big year for Bryce Young coming into year 2. It's a year for him to finally, I would say reset off of last year. I wouldn't say it's make or break just yet, but it is a chance to reset and truly show the fans, everyone here, that he can be the quarterback that we saw in spurts, really that Green Bay Packers game. But he can be that quarterback consistently for this team and will them to some wins next year and make this a competitive football team. Expectations for Bryce Young heading into year 2, and I've talked a little bit about this in various episodes. I don't know if you follow all of them. In my mind, when you think about a successful season for Bryce Young, some people may have this unrealistic expectation that he's got to hit like 1,000 yards and 30-plus touchdowns. I don't think that's the case. I think we're going to be a very heavy run team this year. And so for me, when I think about Bryce Young and who Bryce is going to be as our quarterback for the Carolina Panthers, I really do sit in the 3,500 to 3,800 yard range is successful. And you maybe could talk me into 3,400 yards being a successful season. When we talk about touchdown passes, 20 to 25 would be ideal. Single-digit interceptions. 9 interceptions would be great. I mean, if we get into 10 or 11, sure, kind of balances out as long as we're at that 25, 26, 27 pass touchdowns. Also, know that he likes to scramble. I know he's not a Lamar Jackson. I like to joke with Nolan about, Lamar. He's not Lamar Jackson by any means, but he does have the ability to escape the pocket, to be elusive when needed, and make plays with his feet in the run game. Although I don't want him to, heavily rely on that. The thing that is going to set up Bryce for success this year is going to be the running game, and it's going to be the offensive line that's built around him that allows him to throw the ball, that allows him to step up into the pocket like we've seen with Bryce Young. And then you have the playmakers around him now, Johnson, Xavier, Thielen, even Mingo maybe, Terrace Marshall, Amir Smith. I can keep naming them, Chuba Hubbard, maybe Miles Sanders. We're not even getting into Tommy Tremble or Jatavian Sanders, tight end. But these weapons around Bryce, that's what it's going to take to elevate him. When you go back and look at the difference in Bryce Young and CJ Stroud last year, there's a lot of difference statistically speaking between the two. One of the things that really stands out, those who maybe follow, is they had about the same number of pass attempts, but CJ Stroud had over 1,000 more passing yards. I can't even remember the exact number offhand, but almost 1,000 more passing yards in Bryce Young, but a lot of that had to do with yards after catch. Having guys that can get yak greatly improves Bryce, the offense, and everything around him. So for me, I do look for a big year for Bryce Young in year 2 in the NFL. And hey, I hope we see a lot more winning here, closer to 6, 7, 8 wins. I'd love to see the playoffs. But we're going to take baby steps and progress as much as we can. And, right the ship. Right the ship and prove a lot of people wrong. At least that's what I'm hoping for here. Next on our list, we have running backs. Lots of running backs, crowded running back room, crowded wide receiver room. Let's talk about it. And we're going to go through again alphabetically. So we'll start with Raheem Blackshear, 5'9", 190 pounds, out of Virginia Tech, entering his 3rd season, undrafted free agent. Remember, started with Buffalo, then made his way down here off the practice squad. Got to see a little bit of opportunity in the 2022 season. Not a lot. I mean, in both seasons that he's been in the NFL, not a lot of production in the rushing attack. He really has been the 3rd back on the team. Where we've really seen him thrive is the return game. And that's really what he has been brought in for. In 2022, he had 19 returns, 513 yards. 66 was his long. And then in 2023, 16 returns for 430 yards. 52 was his longest return. Looking at the changes in the kickoff rules and kickoff return, I do think Raheem Blackshear still has a chance to make the roster. But as we start to go through the list of Raheem Blackshear, Mike Boone, Chuba Hubbard, Rashad Penny, Miles Sanders, Jaden Sheridan, there's a lot of folks, right? And I think we're going to carry 3 backs. So I think whoever breaks it in as the 3rd back on the roster is someone that is going to have to get some touches, either playing special teams, whether it be kickoff return, or being a contributor in special teams elsewhere, whether it's kickoff. Talked about kick return, maybe punt return, whatever they can do to get on the field and help the team. As far as outlook for Raheem Blackshear in 24, if he is on the roster and he does make the cut, it's kind of way too early to project some of these things right now, but I do think he has a very good chance, like above 50%. If I had to throw out a percentage to make the team right now, I say that because I don't know what's going to happen with some of these other guys on the back end. But I think I'd see a very similar role. Not a ton of touches, at least for what we would see right now, unless someone gets hurt, which we don't want to see that, and involved in the kick return game. Next up on our list, we have Mike Boone, running back, who has spent time across the league again. Minnesota, Denver, and Houston, now entering into his 7th season. I can't count. Most recently with Houston. He hasn't had a significant breakout year as a running back. Came out of Cincinnati. His most productive year was 2019 with Minnesota, 49 carries, 273 yards, 3 touchdowns. Since then, he's kind of moved around a little bit. Like I said, last year with Houston, didn't really see much production. 5 carries for 23 yards, no touchdowns, 4.6 yards per carry. Right now, Mike Boone will be trying to compete. Here's the thing I like to say with all these guys. He may be trying to compete for a roster spot, but I do think more of a practice squad player right now. That's not to say that this guy isn't going to make the roster, but just based off of how many players we're going to keep, who's here, who's not. I would love to see any of these guys come out and shine in the preseason and show us that they have the ability to contribute to this team. But as far as Mike Boone in the 2024 season, I think he is someone to watch for a cut or to make the practice squad. Moving down the list, we have Jonathan Brooks, rookie coming off of an ACL injury, 6 foot, 207 pounds, out of Texas, in the second round pick from this past year. I think if he was healthy, or if any other team besides us, primarily the Dallas Cowboys, had picked him, that this pick would have been, everyone would have been raving about how great it was for that team. But he is coming off an ACL injury, and from what we are gathering, he probably isn't going to be ready for training camp. It's funny, in the very beginning of this whole thing, a lot of people are like, we were hearing that he would be, or possibly would be, and then we get into it. And I said then, I was like, you got to hold your breath, folks. Like, one, you don't want to work him back too soon. But these things take a lot of time. I think that's why we've seen a few additions to the running back room. Rashad Penny, Jaden Sheridan, undrafted. But looking back, last year at Texas was really his production. Because remember, he sat behind Robinson. He sat behind backs his first 2 seasons. Did get a little bit of production, but not so much like he did this past year as the primary workhorse. 187 carries, 1,139 yards, 6.1 average, and 10 touchdowns. Receiving wise, much more involved as well. 25 receptions, 286 yards, 11.4 average, 1 touchdown. Jonathan Brooks is the future of the Carolina Panthers running back room. I don't know at what point this year he sees action. I mean, when you talk about a guy who's coming off an injury like this that happened in November, and now you're getting into the NFL, and you've got a lot of other backs in the room right now, he could very well start the season on the PUP list, sit out the first 4 weeks, be reevaluated, or we may not even see him until, I don't know, week 8. We could see him after the bye. These things, as they play out, I think a lot will also depend just on the success of the team. There's no reason to push him back until he is 100%, because he is the future. And when you talk about who's going to be here next year, he's really, besides Miles Sanders, the only back that's signed to a 1-year deal or on an expired contract that likely be on the 53-man roster. So I do think you've got to ease this guy in. Know that when you do get him, he is going to be a valuable piece of this offense for Bryce Young in the passing game, rushing the ball, and hopefully being that explosive back. We're never going to have another Christian McCaffrey, but a back that can do some things to help out your young, developing quarterback. Cornerstone piece to this offense. If I had to give a prediction for stats, which is very hard to do because a lot of things hinge on how many games is he going to play, when is he going to be out there. I'm guessing 300, 400 yards rushing, 2 or 3 touchdowns is my bar right now. Now, when we get closer to the season, understanding in the preseason of when he's going to play, I'll up that prediction and projection, and I'll probably look at the sports books and see what they are saying. But right now, that is I haven't looked at anything. I'm just saying, thinking that he's going to take a while to get out there, and you're going to have to spread the ball around with Chuba, Miles, Raheem, whoever's back there. I'm going to kind of benchmark myself right there with my prediction going into the season. Next on the list, we have Chuba Hubbard, RB1 in the Carolinas, 6'1", 210, big running back, held out of Oklahoma State. Fantastic pick for a 4th-round pick. A lot of production out of this pick from Chuba Hubbard. Let's take a look at his stats. Last year, 238 carries, which was ninth in the league, 902 yards, was 20th, 5 rushing touchdowns, 3.8 average, was not great. Best season yet, and I think if he had truly been RB1 and given the carries like he should have earlier in the season, he could have easily eclipsed 1,000 yards. He was right there, with 902, and I think if he had another 20, maybe 22 touches, which he could have gotten from Miles Sanders earlier in the year, he would have hit 1,000-yard mark. Seeing a lot of disrespect for him around some of the posts that I've seen, not in Carolina, but outside the league, ranking him as like the 25th plus back in the league. I'm not saying he's a home run hitter, and maybe statistically he's in that range, but I do think he is better than given credit, especially, like I said, when you talk about touches. Great first year here in Carolina, 612 yards on 172 carries, 5 touchdowns. 2022 production fell off a little bit with 466 yards, 4.9 average, and 2 touchdowns. Going into this year, right now he is running back 1 until we see a healthy Jonathan Brooks, and I don't think that's going to change, at least for the near term. So for production-wise, I think it's his job to lose. If, when Brooks comes back healthy, I think Brooks is going to have to earn it, and Chuba's not just going to give it up. So for me, thinking that we're going to eventually see Brooks and we may see touches dispersed a little bit more, I do think for me, Chuba Hubbard this year, maybe another 800 to 900-yard year, maybe 750 to 800 to 850. Again, I'll probably have to go back and look at the sports books when the season starts to give you a better projection on what I think, but this is just me spitballing right here. He is on a contract year. He's got to prove himself, whether it's to us or to someone else that wants to pick him up. We know the running back market is devalued. You can talk all about Christian McCaffrey getting paid. Christian McCaffrey is one of one. What he gets paid is not what other running backs get paid or are going to get paid. So for Chuba Hubbard, this is, again, a year for him to prove it, to show to us and the rest of the league that he should be around. And like, hey, I know you just drafted this rookie, but I'm here. I'm your running back, and I should be the future of the franchise. Maybe you have a solid 1-2 between these two moving forward. We move on down to Rashad Penny, 5'11", 220 pounds out of San Diego State, former first-round pick in Seattle. Ties directly to Dave Canales when Dave Canales was in Seattle, and that is why he has been brought in. His best year was in 2021, 749 yards rushing, 6 touchdowns. Since then, it's been hit or miss. 2023 was definitely not a great year for him. 11 carries, 33 yards, no touchdowns. But I think Dave Canales is familiar with him, and we talk about what Matt Rule did when he brought in his guys. We can talk about Frank Reich. Like, coaches want to bring in players that they are familiar with, that either know their system or their work ethic. And this is an example of a guy that Dave Canales knew, spent time with, and now like, hey, you know what? Our running room, we've got Chuba Hubbard. Don't really know about Miles Sanders. We've got Jonathan Brooks, who's coming off an injury. Maybe Rashad Penny can be rejuvenated into something. Hey, at least for the first, short-term part of the season, is navigate the running back room itself. I don't really see him as a returner. Right now, he hasn't returned a kick since 2019, and even when he did, he only returned a few kickoffs back then. But you never know, man, with the rule change, could be opening up the door to something totally different with this. As far as outlook with Rashad Penny, and I should have said this with Chuba Hubbard, he's safe to make the roster. Jonathan Brooks is safe to make the roster. Rashad Penny, again, bubble player. I don't have a lot of high expectations, and he may just be a training camp body. Could be a cut casualty, a practice squad guy. But I think at least Dave Canales will have a guy in here during camp that he knows. Maybe he's like, what, I can find something in him and open up a door to get him kind of closer back to the production that he saw during his time in Seattle. All right, y'all. Possibly one of the most controversial running backs on the roster right now. Players, whatever you want to say, and it's not really controversial. It's more or less, how does he fit into the 53-man roster? And this year, underwhelming 2023 season for Miles Sanders, 129 carries, 432 yards, one touchdown. Even though it was underwhelming, he still eclipsed 432 yards, which is by no means fantastic, but still a little bit more than I thought. Former second-round pick out of Philadelphia. We know that Philly was the place that he shined. He had, up until this point, he had rushed for 700 or more yards every year in the NFL for the first 4 seasons. Panthers fans last year, we thought we were getting a home run hitter in Miles Sanders. It was going to just come in, take over, show us that, hey, man, we've got the future. I don't even want to say you have to talk about McCaffrey in these parts because that's all we've known, really, outside of Jonathan Stewart, Williams, those guys. But at least in recent memory, Miles Sanders was not that last year, unfortunately. I don't know that he will get back to what he was in Philadelphia, but he's only going into his 6th season, and he definitely was something in Philly. It's like the time that he spent in Philly, you even go back and look at some that he missed time during some of those years, so very easily could have eclipsed 1,000 yards in 2020, 2021 as well. Missed a little bit of time. What we saw in 2022 was what we thought we were getting. Also involved in the pass game quite a bit there. His rookie season, he had 50 receptions for 509 yards. I mean, this guy looked like the real deal. But here we are, man, heading into year 2. What people are going to tell you is that he is likely on the bubble, is someone to watch. If you talk about a surprise cut, a player that may not make the roster, Miles Sanders' name is going to come up every single time it's talked about. I don't know if it's fair or not. It's just the nature of the business. And I think he knows that, and to be out here to prove and show that the work that he is putting in this offseason, which we hope is going to turn around and be a little bit better, that he's here to prove that he should be in the NFL on the Carolina Panthers. Did suffer a minor setback in OTAs and minicamp. Hopefully that doesn't linger over into training camp, but I know him not being healthy would be detrimental to him in having any shot or chance at making the roster this year. I don't know about, predicting stat lines. I'd love to think that he could go out and get 500 yards rushing next year, 600, maybe 700 would be like out of this world. But I don't know how we're going to disperse the ball again. That's the biggest thing when you talk about breaking these things down, is like, how are we dispersing all of this stuff? So for me, I think right now I'll probably sit with a pretty similar line heading into the season with 400 to 500 yards rushing or so. Maybe, I don't know, 3.5 yards per carry and 2 or 3 touchdowns would be my initial thought. I hope I'm proven wrong. That's all I'll say with that. Closing out the running back conversation, we have Jaden Sheridan, undrafted free agent out of Monmouth. Heck of a running back. Successful career at the FCS level. 2021 had 497 yards. 2022 breakout year, 1,722 rushing yards, 8.4 yards per carry, 13 touchdowns. This past year, 1,478 yards rushing, 10 touchdowns, 6.7 yards per carry. Also involved in the passing game, 20 receptions, 123 yards. 5'9", 195, again, a little smaller. If you go and watch some of the film and tape on this guy, he definitely is a playmaker. And again, as I go back and look at every single person on this roster, and I say Jonathan Brooks, Chuba Hubbard are the 2 backs that are safe, I start to look at Raheem Blackshear, Shad Penny, Miles Sanders, Jaden Sheridan as like, which one of those guys out of this group is going to make the 53 man. And if Brooks is on pup, then you really have two out of that group. And I can't wait to see him in the preseason. The thing, though, what I like to say about all these guys is they are undrafted for a reason. Like, sure, it feels like a golden steal for us because we got the player, whoever it is. You got to remember, all these other teams passed on them as well, which I know you can't draft everyone, but every team looked over them and said, you know what, we're going to pass. And there's a lot of success stories for undrafted free agents. But it's like last year, the running back out of App State. And I was like hopeful people that would contribute just didn't pan out. So don't get too attached, man, because these things, take course. It is a business. The one thing about it is, at the very least, we know that we'll get to see all these guys carried out into the final cuts with the way that the offseason program has been restructured without having multiple cut periods going through. Yeah, I'm excited to see him, though. Preseason, get him some touches, get him back in the return game, and that is a possible spot where Jaden Sheridan can make the 53-man roster. Woo! That's going to do it for running backs. All right, well, next on the list, we have wide receivers. And I'm going to record this now because the list continues to grow. Right now, the Panthers have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 wide receivers on the roster. It feels like every week they are adding someone new. Speaking of adding new, we're going to start at the very beginning. We're doing this in alphabetical order with Dawood Davis, who was just signed recently, I think in this past week, out of the UFL. And I'm actually going to go out now that I have this pulled up, take a look at his UFL stats. He had a very successful year in the UFL. Let's see if we can pull this up. 5 receiving touchdowns, 446 receiving yards. Very solid production. Remember, the UFL is, 8 games, an 8-game season. So you double that, and you're talking close to 1,000-yard receiver. Now, during his time in the NFL, which I'll go back to in a second, he did bounce around a little bit. Actually, might be able to pull it up. Maybe not. He spent some time in the league bouncing around squads, and now, hey, gets his chance, right? Getting his chance to make the NFL roster. Man, it's when you talk about having 11 wide receivers right now with probably 6 making the team, you'd be hard to imagine 7. So 53-man roster, again, 25 offense, 25 defense. It may not be split exactly like that because you have your 3 special teams. 24, 26, 27, 23, depending on, where you want to keep players on each side. But it's a lot of bodies, man. It's a lot of bodies. And I don't know. I think it's going to be a fun year in camp with all of these guys that continue to get brought in week after week. Who else is the Panthers going to sign? I mean, as we are number 1 in the waiver wire, it wouldn't surprise me to see us continue to try to make transactions to give Bryce Young weapons. Dawood Davis in the books. Let's talk about Deontay Johnson, the biggest acquisition of the season for the Carolina Panthers on the offensive side of the ball. Maybe say the interior offensive line with Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis. But for now, we'll talk about Johnson. 5'10", 183, former 3rd-round pick with Pittsburgh. Last year had 51 receptions, 717 yards, 5 touchdowns. Throughout his career, the worst season he had was his rookie year, was 680 yards. Wouldn't we love that? When we think about the rookies that we've had here, the receivers we've had over the past few years, Mingo, Marshall, I would gladly take almost 700 yards receiving. But looking back at his production, I mean, sure, he had a Roethlisberger, but then he also had a hodgepodge of terrible quarterbacks there in Pittsburgh, but still able to put up a lot of production. 882 yards, 1,100 yards in 21. Did not have any touchdowns in 2022, even though he had 882 yards. We want to see him get into the end zone. But where he's really going to help this offense is his ability to get open as a true number one wide receiver. Talking about like stats and predictions coming into this season for Johnson, a lot of people probably want to say he can hit 1,000 yards because Adam Thielen did it. But me, I'm also sitting in the range of like 800 to 900 to 950, probably 850 to 950 more so, only because I do think we're going to run the ball a little bit more than people expect. I think we're also going to have just a few more weapons for Bryce Young to get the ball to. I do think he'll still rely on him, but I also think you still have Adam Thielen, Xavier, Mingo, hopefully, Terrace Marshall. How I don't know how this whole thing plays out, Amir Smith-Marset. So I'm just thinking maybe some of the production that would go to Johnson gets taken away. But if you are a Carolina Panthers fan, this acquisition, trading away Jackson, who we know we were about to cut anyways, and getting Deontay Johnson, a number one wide receiver, in his contract year, playing for a contract as well, we hope, man, we just hope this thing turns into something big with Deontay Johnson this season in the Carolina Panthers. We have not had this. Bryce Young has not had this. It's only been 1 year, but still, he's not had a weapon like this in Carolina. I'm excited, man. I'm excited to see that connection 9 to 5. 9 to 5 is going to be the slogan. Fire up your Dolly Parton. 9 to 5. Every single day, every single game. Can't wait for that. Next up, we have our man, the legend, Xavier Leggett. So weird trying to enunciate his name the way he wants to say it instead of Leggett, but here we go. Year at the University of South Carolina last year. If you follow the show, you know I've always been a big fan of his. To see him in person a few times, the Texas A&M game when he returned the kick off, touchdown. Yeah, man, big year for him, I hope. Just want him to stay healthy. I know he had the hamstring issue in, oh gosh, way back in OTAs, very, very early in OTAs. It kind of just sat. And it made sense. Like, you don't want to rush him back, soft tissue injury. I think it's another reason when they talk about moving the offseason back and giving you a longer break, be a lot easier to like start in late June or early July and then just transition and work your way in. Because you put all in this work and now you get a 30 or 40-day break and then you come back. Last year, 71 receptions, 1,255 receiving yards, 7 touchdowns. Very big. Didn't do a lot in the rushing game last year, but involved in the return game. I talked about the return in 2022. In 2023, he had 10 returns for 213 yards. And I know some people out there probably are going to point to his lack of consistency. You know, you look at the first 4 seasons, the dude battled a lot of adversity. Like, go out and look at his story. That's all I got to say. For someone that goes through personal adversity, is they're in a situation, things are going to take a toll on you mentally, man. And I think that's part of the reason that we saw a dip. Not to mention they also had Juice, who was a number one receiver that took a lot of the production during his time. So still high on Xavier Leggett heading into this year. Rookie season wise, I'd love to have him push 600, 700 yards. Knowing what we saw with Mingo last year, 400 yard mark, like, I want to be a little bit more greedy, say 500, 600, 7 for him to be set up for a successful year. But I think more than anything, he's going to be another weapon that can get involved. And last year, I know we tried to say like Laviska Shenault would be our next, Debo in the backfield. I think this could be a little bit closer. Not the same by any stretch of the imagination, but another solid weapon for Bryce Young. That's what this whole draft is about. All right. Fun one to talk about here. Terrace Marshall Jr., 139 yards last season. We know the production wasn't there. Not what we expected. Former second-round pick. This is a make or break season for him. It could be make or break being in the NFL for the rest of his life. In 2021, 17 receptions, 138 yards. 22 was when people thought, oh man, this guy's coming alive. Second half of the season under Steve Wilkes, things are great. 28 receptions, 490 yards, 1 touchdown. And it just never panned out. We have Dave Canales, who has shown them at least so far. And hey, I'm all for happy stories, whatever you want to call them, Disney success stories. I'm hopeful that coming into this year that maybe we do get to see it. But I think the thing with all these, when you start talking about production and stats, like that's a lot of people on the roster, man. And so when I look at the roster today, I'd say Johnson is safe, Excel's safe, Adam Thielen's safe. Mingo, yes, I would say safe. That's 4. And then we got 5, 6, 7. You maybe could throw Amir Smith-Marset in there. So you're talking maybe 2 spots with 4 or 5 guys trying to compete to get that last spot. I think Terrace Marshall's in that realm right now. As far as like Panthers wanted to move on from him, cut him, 3-man trade. And I don't know what you would get in a trade. But I do think specifically that this is a big year for him. I don't know that means that's a big year as far as production, but it's a big year to show us that, hey, maybe Terrace Marshall Jr. can actually come around and be a viable weapon for this offense. Next on the list, we move down the line to Jonathan Mingo, another second-round pick. What is up with us? Maybe that's why we moved up in the first round for Xavier, to make sure he wasn't a second-round wide receiver that got picked in Carolina. 6'2", 220, second-round pick out of last year. Last year he had 43 receptions, 418 yards, no touchdowns. Did not get in the end zone. Made some kind of wonky plays, missed a little bit of playing time when we go out and look at number of games played. 15 total games played, so he missed 2. So maybe he would have got to 500 yards if healthy and he didn't miss any time. 9.7 yards per carry. He made some great plays at times. Some good plays, but then also some where you're like, dude, you have to get both feet in bounds when you make a catch in the NFL. He's over there skirting the sideline. It's hard to know what year 2 is going to be for him. I haven't sold all my stock in him yet, and I do think he's set up to. It's been pretty quiet, honestly. We haven't heard a lot coming out of camp with him, so I wonder how he's going to fit in what position. If we're going to see him more in the slot this year, backing up Adam Thielen, is he going to start over Xavier Legette early? Maybe. It's really hard to know. I think we'll know a lot more as we get into camp. Maybe looking at a similar stat line from what he had this year to next year, Mingo, but I hope it's way more. Right? I hope it's more than that. Next on the list, when we talk about players that have connections to coaches, and specifically Coach Canales, David Moore coming over after spending some time. He spent time in Seattle, where probably his most successful years. 3 seasons with Seattle, former 7th-round pick, 18, 19, and 20. Decent production for a 7th-round draft pick, right? 445 yards, 301 yards, 417 yards, 526 touchdowns for those seasons. Not a lot happening in Detroit. 2022 season, he didn't play. And then in 23, spent that with Tampa Bay, only had 7 targets, or 5 receptions, 7 targets, 94 yards, and a touchdown. But he comes over. Dave Canales knows him, worked with him. It's another one just like Rashad Penny, where you bring in the people you know, the work ethic, the culture setters, those that are familiar with maybe your scheme or offense that you want to run, and see what they can do. You give them another shot, which, hey, that's what he's here for. I do think, starting to talk about borderline, who's on the back end of making this roster. I'd put David Moore right. I'd put him towards the end right now, but wouldn't be surprised, man, because we've heard, Canales, Morgan, all those guys are not tied to individuals. It's one of the benefits. All right, we stay in the Carolinas now with Sam Pickney out of Coastal Carolina, 6'4", 220 pounds. Super, super senior. I don't know if super senior. It's been 4 seasons at Georgia Southern, right? Make sure I get this right. I'm like Georgia State. Sorry, see, I did say it wrong. Georgia State, the Georgia State Panthers. Then 2 seasons at Coastal Carolina. Had really on and off years in his college career. 2 yards, 460 yards, then 815, then a drop in production in 21. And with Coastal, did great, almost 1,000 yards in 22, and did hit 1,000 yards in 23, 3 touchdowns and 8 touchdowns in that span. Sam Pickney, undrafted free agent. You always pull for these guys to make the roster, but when you start talking about these back end rosters, sixth wide receiver, fifth, sixth, seventh wide receiver, if we were to carry that many, these guys are going to also need to be able to play special teams. You start talking about those borderline players, because you got to think about how many people are actually carried on the roster during game day. You got to think about, well, the number of snaps and plays, and if any of these undrafted to really have a chance, they're going to have to go out and earn it through special teams play. Haven't heard much about him during camp, during OTAs earlier this year, but hey, I'm excited to see him. I'm like, bring in any and all wide receivers that you can to give us some competition in the Carolinas. Next up, we have Cam Sims entering into his 6th season. It says 6th, but yeah, I guess because he spent last year on the practice squad. So before that, 4 seasons in Washington. 2020 was kind of his breakout year. 32 receptions, 477 yards, but nothing big. I think he is a practice squad player right now, and maybe that's your Sam Pickney, your Jalen Coker, those guys that are kind of going to be on that borderline. As far as, production and what I expect, I don't have a big expectation for Cam Sims heading into this year. All right, Amir Smith Marset, another journeyman, Minnesota, Chicago to Carolina. I did a fantastic preseason with the Chiefs last year. Saw him come alive in the offense more towards the end of the year. A little bit of rushing attack, end around, getting him involved. And then punt returns. I think he is your primary punt returner again this year, which kind of gives you a notch. Talking about roster and making the team, I think that is part of the reason that we could see him potentially making the cut. As far as stat-wise, I mean, not a lot. Again, last year, the 8 for 51, no touchdowns, and then he did have the return touchdown. He did have 8 carries, 74 yards, and 1 touchdown last year. And I posted the highlight of this touchdown around a few days ago on Instagram. You can follow that. I would expect similar production, like not much more, still being involved in punt returns, a little more in the passing game, but I think he's going to be kind of a tough spot right now for him. Taking away some of the reps in as far as the guys, I think he's back towards like the 5th or 6th wide receiver on the roster for that 53-man cut. And as I'm doing this now, I look at this. I just realized I skipped right over Jalen Coker. I was like looking at this alphabetically, and I started with David Davis, and I was like, where's Jalen Coker on this list? So let me go out and cover Jalen Coker because he's probably the most talked about undrafted free agent on the team now. Hailing out of Holy Cross, 6'3", 213, big wide receiver. Pretty similar stat line to our Pickney out of Coastal. Last 2 years, really solid, 914 yards, 1 touchdowns, and then 1,035 yards, 15 touchdowns, 22-23. Not bad, though. Jalen Joker, a lot of people thought he could have been drafted. He has a pretty nice contract. But I still think with him, with Pickney, with whoever you want on the back end of this roster, Marset kind of his own thing. Sorry, y'all. Oh, this is the right tab. Sorry, I just talked through all of it. So, anyways, oh, sorry, I got distracted by what was on there. But I do think special teams got to be able to contribute in special teams to have a chance at making it. But I'm excited. I do think he could be that sixth, possibly. I think we can have 7 wide receivers. That's just too many. Another name is probably forgotten. Mike Strachan. They said there was a different pronunciation of his name like last year. But anyway, 6'5", 225. Former 7th-round pick out of Indianapolis. Ties to Frank Reich. That's where and why he came over. Last year he had 1 reception for 45 yards. That was it. I thought he had more than that. Now, isn't that the Chicago game? We played in 4 games. That was pretty much it, man. He spent a little bit of time in the practice squad, got to get called up, made the impact when he could. I thought for just a minute after he made that 1 reception that, like, oh, man, this guy's going to turn into the next big thing for Carolina and Bryce Young. It just kind of fizzled out from there. So I do think he's borderline. Like, I don't know that I'd have him on the 53-man roster right now. Closing us out, we have Adam Thielen, who last year got right back on his winning ways. Some people will say he was force-fed, that's how he got the ball. He had 103 receptions, only the second time in his career that he had over 100 receptions. 1,014 receiving yards, only 4 touchdowns. Pretty low on the number of touchdowns. Became Bryce Young's safety blanket big time last year. Entering into his 11th season, getting a little bit older, he'll be 34 here. As we head into the season, I still think he can be contributing. What I don't know is, like, this could be his last year. Could be his last ride in the NFL, and it's not something that's really going to be talked about right now. But you don't see many 34, would be 35 next year, wide receivers in the NFL. It's like those positions is I always like to hate saying that's old because it's close to what I am. It just gets old. You're considered in NFL terms. This year, I don't think he's going to hit 1,000 yards. Again, I think it's just because there's more capable players here that's going to be able to impact and, disperse the ball around too. So for me, I think 750 yards right now would be my measuring stick of the over-under. Maybe four or 5 touchdowns. I do think, again, Bryce is going to continue to rely on him, which he should. But I think having other playmakers around him is going to open things up for him and the entire offense and the Carolina Panthers next season. All right, folks, that is going to do it this episode. We went through quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers. The next episode, I'll close this out. The next episode, I'm going to go through offensive line and tight ends and specialists, I think, and then I'll switch to defense. So this is probably going to end up taking like 4 videos. My gosh. 4-part series. Anyways, hey, first series is done. That's all I got for today. It's Carolina Dad. Y'all have a good one.